Cam Newton's ESPN firing caught plenty of people off guard. But Stephen A. Smith's response may have been even more surprising. He opened up about losing one of his biggest debate partners and revealed what he really thinks about the decision. Let me break it down. The morning it happened, ESPN was already in chaos. Ryan Clark had been pulled off NFL Live mid-taping the night before. The 46-year-old was informed of the company's decision during a taping of NFL Live on Monday evening, and he did not return to the show after receiving word that he'd been fired. By Tuesday morning, the names kept coming. Carl Ravitch, Stefania Bell, David Lloyd, Tom Pelissero, Charles Davis, and then the one nobody saw coming, Cam Newton. Former NFL MVP Cam Newton, a rising star on First Take, was included in ESPN's latest round of summer layoffs. This wasn't some fringe hire on his way out the door. Given his recent addition to the talent roster at ESPN and quick rise through the ranks at First Take, Newton was one of the most surprising names to be let go in the latest round of layoffs at the company. He just signed a multi-year deal with ESPN last August to expand his role on First Take, shortly after becoming a regular contributor to the program. The timing stings even more when you remember why Newton got that seat in the first place. He was brought on board as a replacement for Shannon Sharpe, who departed ESPN in the summer of 2025 amidst a sexual assault lawsuit and subsequent settlement. Newton didn't just fill a chair. He became the network's replacement for Shannon Sharpe as Smith's primary Monday co-host during football season, the show's highest-rated day of the week. That's the seat that just got pulled out from under him. ESPN framed the whole thing as corporate housekeeping. Company president Jimmy Pitaro sent a memo to staff explaining the moves centered around an examination, following ESPN's acquisition of NFL Network as part of the NFL's equity deal with the network, but that other parts of the company would also be affected. Pitaro told employees over the past several months, "We've made significant progress integrating the NFL assets that we acquired into ESPN. Throughout this process, we have taken the time to carefully evaluate our collective teams, resources, and organizational structure to best position us for the future." Clean corporate language. Nothing about ratings, nothing about friction, nothing about the noise Newton had generated all season. Just restructuring. But here's where Stephen A. Smith comes in, because he didn't let it stay that clean. Within a day of the news breaking, Smith sat in front of his own camera on his own YouTube channel and said what the memo didn't. He didn't hide behind corporate talk. He said plainly that he wasn't happy and that the people above him knew it. Smith didn't pretend he had the power to stop it either. He acknowledged straight up that decisions like these are often driven by fiscal and financial circumstances beyond his control. When reporters pushed him for his opinion on the wave of layoffs, Smith made it clear he wanted to keep Clark, but ultimately, the decision was not his to make. Notice something there. In that first wave of comments, Smith spent more time defending Ryan Clark by name than anyone else. That's not an accident, and it's not the whole story either, because Smith's relationship with Newton wasn't nearly as simple as co-host loses his job, other co-host is sad about it. There was history there, real history. And to understand why Smith's reaction carries the weight it does, you need to go back to what happened between these two men just months before the layoffs ever hit. Rewind to before any of this. Cam Newton wasn't a broadcaster by trade. He was a former NFL MVP, a Carolina Panthers legend, a Super Bowl quarterback who spent his post-playing days building a YouTube channel called Fourth One. That channel was already pulling serious numbers on its own, with Newton generating strong engagement and routinely pulling in over 2 million monthly video views while going viral for his takes on football and life. ESPN noticed. In the fall, the network brought him on as a regular on First Take, joining Smith and host Molly Kareem at the desk. When the hire was announced, ESPN executive David Roberts talked up what Newton would bring to the table, saying his addition brought an electrifying presence to the roster, calling his charisma dynamic and pointing to the high-profile debates it would create alongside Smith. Newton, for his part, sounded genuinely excited to be there. He said he'd always brought passion and energy into everything he did, and that wouldn't change at ESPN. That he was looking forward to going toe-to-toe with the best in the business and bringing the same intensity he brought to the field. Fans were split from day one. Some thought it was a mismatch waiting to happen. Others thought the chemistry between Newton and Smith could be great television. One fan predicted the pairing would be hilarious. Another said Newton was pure entertainment. But there was skepticism too. Plenty of people online weren't sold on a football player without a broadcasting background sitting across from the most powerful voice in sports media. Whatever the doubts, it worked, at least for a stretch. Newton's rapport with Smith became real enough that the network elevated him specifically to fill the Monday slot, the highest-rated day on the show's calendar. That's not a small thing. That's the network trusting a guy with barely a year of experience with its most valuable real estate. Smith, by most accounts, was one of the reasons that trust existed. Fans and insiders alike noted that ESPN originally took a chance on Newton, largely because of the backing he had from Smith himself. So this wasn't two strangers forced to share a desk. This was Smith, in some sense, vouching for Newton, building him up, giving him a stage, treating him like family on live television, which makes what happened next land so differently, because a partnership built on that kind of trust doesn't just get tested by outside forces. It gets tested by what happens when one guy's loyalty gets questioned by the other. And that's exactly what happened in the spring, months before any layoff was even on the table, when Newton made a decision that put Smith in an uncomfortable spot, live in front of an audience that was watching every second of it. In March, Newton invited Jason Whitlock onto his 4th and 1 YouTube channel. If you don't follow sports media beyond the games, you need to understand what that name means to Stephen A. Smith. Reports describe Whitlock as a media critic who has repeatedly gone after Smith, and Smith himself has said in the past that he hates Whitlock with a passion. So when Newton sat down across from Whitlock for a lengthy interview, and much of that conversation ended up centering on Smith, it was never going to pass quietly. Whitlock used the platform Newton gave him to call Smith a fraud, and according to reports, he cited what he claimed were fabrications from Smith's memoir while making the accusation. Newton, sitting right there with a live mic, didn't push back. He let it play out. Smith found out, and he didn't wait long to respond. He got in front of his own camera and went after Whitlock first, reportedly even setting up what looked like a mock fundraising page mocking Whitlock, accusing him of chasing attention, clicks, and money. But when he finished with Whitlock, he turned his attention to Newton directly, and this is where it got personal. Smith told Newton, calling him his brother, that next time somebody sits across from him and calls Smith a fraud, Newton needs to ask them to prove it instead of just sitting there. Smith wasn't finished. He pushed back on the entire premise of the fraud accusation, asking what facts anyone actually had to back it up. He brought up an unrelated interview he'd done, where he'd opened up about watching people get killed as a teenager, and used it to make his larger point, that he'd been honest and forthcoming about his life in public before, and he wasn't going to let someone rewrite that record unchallenged, especially not with his own colleagues sitting there letting it happen. Newton didn't back down from his side of it either. When asked directly why he hadn't pushed back on Whitlock in the moment, Newton said it was because, in his view, there was nothing to correct. That answer didn't sit well with Smith, and it clearly didn't disappear from the relationship either. This wasn't a spat that got resolved with a laugh and a handshake back at the desk. It lingered. Multiple outlets covering the eventual layoff pointed straight back to this moment as unfinished business between the two men. An interview where Newton offered minimal pushback, while Whitlock spent a significant stretch of airtime calling Smith a fraud, and where Smith's response afterward was described as a fiery public reaction calling out Newton for failing to defend a colleague. Now, Smith never said this incident got Newton fired. He doesn't control staffing decisions, and he said so plainly when asked about the layoffs overall. But the pattern here matters for understanding the full picture, because this wasn't the only friction point building underneath Newton's rising profile at the network. There was also the matter of what Newton was saying and doing beyond the Whitlock sit-down. Comments and behavior that were quietly building a file long before any restructuring memo ever got sent. Whitlock wasn't a one-off. By the time Newton's exit came, a picture had formed of a debate partner who kept generating headlines for the wrong reasons, season after season. Go back to February. Newton appeared on the It's Giving podcast and made a comment about women that immediately drew backlash. He said that a woman's value gets lower the more children she has, tying the remark to a conversation he said he'd had with one of the mothers of his own children. That kind of comment doesn't stay contained to one podcast feed. It crosses over, gets clipped, gets attached to his name as an ESPN employee, and becomes something the network has to answer for even when it didn't happen on ESPN's air. Then there was his on-air behavior itself. Reports describe Newton drawing internal criticism for a prolonged, strange vendetta against Patriots quarterback Drake May, the kind of recurring bit that stops feeling like sports debate and starts feeling personal in a way that makes colleagues uncomfortable. Add that to the podcast, comments about gender roles and family dynamics, and you've got a contributor whose off-air persona kept bleeding into questions about whether he belonged on a flagship desk at all. None of that happened in a vacuum either. The Monday seat Newton occupied has been a revolving door for years. The chair moved from Michael Irvin to Shannon Sharp to Newton in under 3 years. That's not stability. That's a seat that keeps changing hands. And every person who sat in it recently has left under a cloud of some kind. So when the layoffs came, multiple reports pointed to a mix of reasons rather than one clean explanation. Corporate restructuring was the official line handed down from the top. But high contract costs and behind-the-scenes friction were both floated as accelerants, the kind of factors that make a company more comfortable cutting a name it might otherwise have protected. Fox Sports radio host Rob Parker was blunt about it publicly, saying he wasn't surprised Newton got fired, and suggesting Newton made a mistake going after his own colleague's rival on his own platform. Jason Whitlock himself weighed in again after the firing, and he wasn't shy about connecting dots. He pointed out that just weeks earlier, Newton had been treated like one of Smith's brothers, and then after the interview, everyone started blaming him for what happened to Newton's position. Whitlock played back a clip of Newton from his own podcast, where Newton was asked directly if he saw his exit coming. Newton said he didn't, but that it wasn't something he wanted to dwell on. The only thing he could focus on now was that he wouldn't be going back to First Take. Whitlock didn't buy the surprise, calling it a little naive given everything that had played out beforehand. So you've got layers here. A corporate restructuring that swept up names across the entire network. A financial calculation about contract value. And sitting underneath all of it, a specific personal unresolved tension between the two men, who were supposed to be the new face of Monday debate television. None of those threads cancel each other out. They all played a part, stacked on top of each other, until the day the pink slip actually came, and how Newton chose to respond to all of it publicly, immediately, on his own platform, tells you as much about where this story goes next as anything Smith said. The day the news broke, Newton didn't disappear or go quiet. He got on his own show, 4th and 1, and addressed it directly. Hours after the story became public, he didn't sound bitter. He said working alongside some of the most talented journalists and sports figures who cover the game gave him a newfound respect for the skill involved in doing it well. He kept going from there. Newton said ESPN couldn't make him hate the network, framing the entire run as something closer to an internship than a career. He said now that he'd seen how production actually works behind the scenes, he'd be foolish not to take the lessons with him. Then he turned it into a broader statement about the media landscape today, saying that if you don't own your own platform, you'll get overlooked, passed by, and end up extinct like the dinosaurs. He didn't stop at his own situation either. Newton addressed what happened to Ryan Clark in the same breath, saying it was unfortunate what happened to Clark, but that it was going to be fine, and that Clark's separate media project wasn't going anywhere. He circled back to his own exit too, saying it was unfortunate what happened to him, at least in some people's eyes, but that he was good. Newton also connected this moment to something that happened years earlier in his football career. He pointed back to the summer the Patriots released him after a rookie named Mac Jones beat him out in training camp. Newton said the day Bill Belichick and Matt Patricia released him from New England was the day nothing in business could surprise him again. And he said he was grateful to have that memory to draw on because not many people get to say they've already been through something like it before. Social media reaction split, the same way it had when he first joined the show. Some fans thought ESPN made the right call, with one person online calling the whole show unwatchable and saying they were glad they didn't waste time on it. Others thought the network was making a mistake letting go of someone who generated real engagement and conversation. That divide had followed Newton from his first day on the show to his last. As for Smith, his public comments stayed focused on the bigger picture of what ESPN had just done to its roster, rather than turning it into a story about himself. He didn't pretend the decision was his, and he didn't pretend he was thrilled about it either. He made clear the bosses knew exactly how he felt, and he acknowledged that the money side of these decisions sits above any one host's preference, no matter how loud that host's voice is on television. What's left now is a show trying to figure out who sits across from Smith on the biggest day of the week. Again, ESPN has reportedly started looking for a permanent replacement for the Monday slot. Newton, meanwhile, has already said the only path forward he's focused on is building 4th and 1 into something bigger than the seat he just lost, without a network's backing behind him this time. The friction between him and Smith over the Whitlock interview never got a clean resolution on camera. The layoff happened before that ever really got settled. And Whitlock, for his part, has kept needling both men publicly since the news broke, keeping the whole tangled situation in the headlines rather than letting it fade. What is certain is this: Smith spoke up on the record about a colleague losing his job at a network where speaking up doesn't always change the outcome. Newton walked out saying he held no resentment, framing the entire chapter as tuition paid toward whatever he builds next. And the empty chair at that Monday desk is still empty, waiting for whoever ESPN decides can handle sitting across from Stephen A. Smith next.